No one would buy her abandoned without clothes in an alien market until a human took her in Veritha's didn't welcome visitors. It swallowed them gently with steam and rust beneath the methane domes. And fractured light panels. The lowest market level pulsed like the inside of a dying animal. Pipes wept condensation. Fluorescent lanterns flickered with a sickly green hue. Meat vendors shouted over the hiss of steam, their voices echoing through the scaffold corridors as scents of boiled fungus and burnt synth protein mixed with the smell of ozone and decay. Dr. Arland Vine walked with his head slightly down, eyes scanning from under the brim of his coat. He moved like a man used to being hunted, or worse. Remembered the air itched too thick, too chemical, but it was safer than the upper rings where surveillance drones might still match his face to the archives down here in the Msget. He was just another shadow with a name. No one asked for his destination. Was a bone vendor said to trade in outlawed dialect chips, specifically the extinct Thalary lineages. He hadn't heard one spoken in over a decade, and he hadn't expected to. Again that changed when he passed a row of shattered crates near the waste vents. A voice behind him snorted, "Still here?" One of the vendors, Jared. "No one wants that mute garbage. 3 failed bids. Rot claim for real. Can't even scream." Someone else said, "Bad stock." A wet laugh, a crunch, something thrown. Arland glanced over, already preparing to forget whatever he'd see, but he didn't forget. She was crumpled in the corner like something discarded mid-use, naked, blue-skinned, bruised and grime-streaked hair, long and tangled, though not black as he first assumed in the shadows, but deep crimson soaked with oil and rain. She wasn't chained. They didn't need to. The law would claim her by the third bell. No one had to touch her anymore. Time would do the rest. One thin arm wrapped across her chest, the other locked around her legs, holding her own ribs like a cage. She didn't flinch as the fruit core bounced near her hip. Didn't blink, didn't move. He should have kept walking. He always did. He'd learned the cost of hesitation years ago, but something in her mouth made him stop. Her lips moved barely, no sound. Arland narrowed his eyes. It wasn't gibberish. It wasn't even language in the conventional sense. It was breath, measured and patterned, a rhythm, oral code. Each breath aligned with an invisible structure like verse with no voice. He stepped closer, the mist around the waste vents swirled at his feet. A memory returned with it unbidden. He'd once seen a child on the dying moons of Risk breathe herself to sleep, reciting those same glyphs before the fires, before the silence. Now here it was again. A dying girl exhaling the sacred breath of a civilization that had been erased. The Ari, their voices were meant to live only in memory, oral scripture, liturgical data encoded in rhythm and breath. No written text survived by design. It was said their gods only remembered what was spoken, and this girl was speaking to the gods. Arlen exhaled slowly, his heart drummed once hard then steady. He crouched, careful not to spook her. The vendor nearest him watched with disinterest. "You want her?" he sneered. "Go ahead. No one's paying roti to dump her. She's already got mold in her joints, mute and stripped, worth less than the coat on your back." Arland said nothing. Instead he reached behind his shoulder and slid his long coat off. The inside was lined with heat thread, old tech but still good. He didn't drape it on her. He offered it gently without touching her, laid it near her feet like a peace flag. Her eyes finally moved slowly. Black irises rimmed in dark gold met his. She didn't thank him, but she didn't look away either. He lowered himself further until he was eye level and spoke in a language that hadn't been legally recognized in over 2 centuries. "Peace in Thalary." Her breathing hitched just a fraction, but her pattern shifted slightly, intentionally. She'd understood. A voice crackled over the overhead to noise sector. "Sweeps begin at 3rd bell. All rot claim assets not tagged will be incinerated. Compliance is mandatory." Arland stood and drew out his data pad. His fingers moved quickly across the cracked screen, activating the cultural archive interface. Long obsolete but still legal under Treaty Protocol 17A. The ancient cultural preservation mandate. He turned to the vendor. "She's not rot claim, she's an oral archive." The vendor scoffed. "Don't quote ancient clauses at me, offworlder. That law is dead." "Not while I'm alive," Arland replied coldly. "I'm claiming her under interstellar preservation rights. She's a linguistic artifact, Ari, oral codex. She's a naked half-dead girl with no name and no papers." Arland tapped the air, projecting the mandate. The green hologram flickered, glitching but held steady. "This is official," he said. "You interfere, it's obstruction of preservation law." The vendor stared at the projection, muttering under his Breath across the market alley. A local enforcer turned but didn't approach. Arlen caught the hesitation in the man's posture. Some laws were buried but not forgotten. Take your salvage archivist, the vendor spat, she rots on your floor instead of mine. Arlen didn't respond. He turned back to her. She hadn't moved, just watched, waiting. He lowered his voice. My name is Arlen. I won't hurt you. I won't ask you questions, but you have to come now before the sweepers come. She blinked once, then again. He extended his hand, not toward her but toward the coat. A moment passed, two, then slowly she moved. Her hands closed around the fabric, pulling it to her shoulders, wrapping it tight across her body. When she stood, her knees wobbled, but she held barefoot, unsteady, glowing faintly blue under the misted market lights. She took one trembling step, then another. The vendor turned away. The enforcer watched without speaking. Together they walked through the steaming corridors, past flickering lights and broken signs. Her silent presence behind him felt fragile, like if he looked too fast she might vanish. They climbed the creaking staircase to the surface levels. The maw rumbled around them, a constant mechanical growl beneath the steel skin of the world. He didn't speak. She didn't ask where they were going. In the silence he glanced back. Her hair, long red, tangled, caught a shaft of flickering neon light. It wasn't dull after all, just hidden under ash and neglect. He opened the door to his quarters, an old observation room above a forgotten book stall. The walls hummed with recycled heat. A basin of warm water stood near a cracked mirror. Clean towels, simple clothes, a long tunic and soft woven leggings folded neatly beside the sink. She paused at the threshold. No one will touch you here, he said. No answer, but she stepped inside. He turned away to give her privacy, setting a ration packet on the counter, then moved to the corner and powered down the room's comlink array. Behind him, faint splashes, water hitting skin, a soft rustle as the coat dropped. He didn't look when he finally turned back. She was crouched near the wall, wrapped in the tunic. Her eyes tracked his every movement, but her expression remained unreadable. He set a heat packet beside her without a word, then slowly, deliberately, he sat down across the room and took out his data pad. He tapped the screen and in the ARI glyphs typed a single phrase, "You're not forgotten." She read it. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, but she shifted a single breath, shallow, measured, controlled, the start of a verse. Her voice was still silent, but her name, he would learn it, and when she gave it, it would be hers again. The silence had changed, not vanished, just shifted. It no longer pressed against the walls like suffocating vapor. Instead it settled gently like dust over something long abandoned, but finally still. 2 hours had passed since Arlen had brought her mirror into the small quarters above the bookstore. The door remained locked. The lights had dimmed automatically into night mode, bathing the room in faint amber. Outside, the low hum of Verrett's maw never ceased. Gears turned, pipes groaned somewhere distant, boots struck metal grates in regular rhythm, but in here it was quiet. Mira sat near the far wall, half curled beneath the thermal wrap he'd given her. The tunic she wore hung awkwardly, too large in the sleeves, but her grip on the cloth had eased. Her crimson hair, damp when she emerged from the basin, had begun to dry in soft, irregular waves across her shoulders. Arlen watched her out of the corner of his eye, not with suspicion but attention. She hadn't tried to run, hadn't asked for more, she hadn't spoken again since whispering her name, but she was still here. He was still learning how much that mattered. She hadn't eaten all the ration pack he'd left beside her. Half of it remained untouched, sealed. Some kind of instinct maybe, or training. Don't take everything, don't be seen as greedy, leave no trace. She hadn't slept either, at least not fully. Every so often she blinked too slowly, her breath would steady, body softening, but then a noise outside would jolt her awake again. Each time she glanced toward the door, to him, to the shadows above the shelves. Arlen didn't speak, just adjusted his seat and turned back to the console's flickering screen. The ARI glyphs shimmered across the old interface, reconstructed syllables coded from long dead. Ad chants. He rubbed at his temple, then entered a new string of variables, adjusting the breath rhythm interval on the 7th cadence. Wrong, still wrong, no matter how carefully he shaped the waveform. The cadence collapsed before the 3rd breath because it had never been meant for text. His throat tightened. The ARI didn't write their knowledge, passed in breath, in rhythm and space. Everything in their culture lived through the body, through voice. Memory was sacred, memory was flesh, and now one of them, one who shouldn't exist, was here, hunched in his home, clutching his coat, silent but breathing the language of gods. He looked at her again. Mira hadn't moved, but her Gaze had shifted to the console, her eyes black irises rimmed with gold watched the glyphs on the screen with steady focus, not curious, not amazed, familiar. He turned the console toward her slowly. She flinched barely, then narrowed her eyes. You recognize this? He said, still no answer. He tapped a line of breath code and played the loop. The console emitted a soft pulse, low, rhythmic, an imitation of the chant she'd mouthed earlier in the market. Her fingers twitched, not reaching, just reacting like a trained muscle responding to old music. He waited. She didn't move. Instead she exhaled through her nose, controlled, deliberate, then leaned forward just slightly and tapped the console once, then again. The first tap shifted the rhythm spacing, the second removed a glyph entirely. The adjustment was precise and completely correct. Arlen blinked once. That's the proper morning interval, he murmured, only used when reciting for the unborn. Her head turned slowly toward him. No response, but not denial either. You're not just a carrier, he said. You were taught formally. She looked away. Her silence said everything. Not denial, not confusion, just unwillingness to offer more. Arlen nodded to himself. That knowledge is supposed to be extinct. The last oral keeper died before I was born. Still no answer. That's fine, he thought. The dead don't talk all at once, and neither do the grieving. He stood and moved to the shelf beside the old water basin. From it he retrieved a second set of clothing, this one thinner, designed for sleep. He walked back and placed it nearby, but not close enough to pressure her. You can wear these if you want. They're softer, easier to sleep in. She didn't move, but she didn't look away either. He backed off without comment and turned toward the mirror. The glass still held a faint layer of fog at its edges. Near the bottom a smudge remained from where she'd traced her name earlier. Mirror, the letters imperfect but firm. He hadn't cleaned it. He wouldn't. When he turned back she was standing slowly, legs stiff, knees hesitant. She crossed the room toward the new clothes. She didn't ask him to look away, didn't gesture, didn't speak, but her body stilled in that quiet, unreadable posture. Again he understood. He walked to the far wall, turned his back and waited. A soft rustle of fabric followed, the sound of old clothes being folded carefully and placed aside. He imagined her fingers smoothing the sleeves, not because she needed to but because it gave her control. He didn't turn around until she cleared her throat, a dry rasping sound barely there. He turned. She was wrapped in the soft tunic and loose leggings, the hem brushing the tops of her bare feet. She sat back down near the console, arms folded under the wrap. Her posture wasn't relaxed, but it wasn't defensive either. He approached slowly and sat across from her. She stared at the glyphs still flickering faintly on the screen. He cleared his throat. I don't record. She looked up. He clarified, anything ever. I write by hand, always. From under the table he pulled out a book, not a data pad, not a console, a real cloth-bound journal, faded, dog-eared, ink-stained. He flipped to the latest page and set it down between them. Do you want to add something? He asked. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached her hand, hovered over the page just long enough to make him think she might stop, but she didn't. Instead she began to write. The glyphs were older than his, more fluid, less rigidly spaced, the kind passed down mouth to mouth, breath to breath. Line after line flowed onto the page in near perfect silence. When she finished she slid it back to him and leaned back, eyes lowered. Arlen studied the text. A ritual, but not for mourning, a remembrance vow, a promise not to let a name fade from the air until the stars themselves died. He looked up, throat tight. You kept the names, he said. You remembered them all. She didn't nod, but her shoulders trembled. Just once I failed to remember one, he said softly. I thought knowledge was enough. I thought if I translated it it would be safe, but I didn't carry it the way you do. I didn't breathe it. She looked at him then. For a long time neither spoke, then quiet, almost inaudible, she said most of them didn't believe it mattered anymore, that no one would come, that silence would be all that's left. Arlen didn't respond, because he'd thought the same thing once, and now she was here, alive, still speaking, even if only in breath. When the lights dimmed further, signaling late night, he stood and offered her a folded blanket. This time she took it from his hands directly. He made his way to the corner of the room, lay down on the floor, and pulled a faded thermal pad over himself. Sleep if you want, he said, I'll be here. She didn't reply, but a few minutes later her breath deepened, not relaxed but real and steady. It was the closest thing to trust he'd seen in years. He lay awake a long time, staring at the glyphs on the ceiling, faded over decades, painted by hands long dead. Her name echoed in his mind. Mira, he would Remember it no matter what came next. When Arlen woke, the room was quiet in a way it hadn't been since Mira arrived. Not frozen, not watchful, just calm. He blinked up at the ceiling, its metal panels humming faintly with the M's recycled energy flow. The light had shifted to soft gray, signaling morning. Through the artificial sky of the underground dome he sat up slowly, his body protesting with the usual stiffness of a night spent on the floor. The old thermal pad beneath him had lost most of its heat. Mira was awake, sitting by the console with her knees drawn up, the blanket pulled around her like a quiet cocoon. Her crimson hair hung loose, slightly frizzed from drying and sleep. She hadn't touched the door, hadn't tried to escape, but something in her posture had changed, not as tight, not as small. She turned as he moved, eyes steady but unreadable. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice gravel from the dry air a little. She said, her voice had softened slightly, still rough but no longer raw. It wasn't trust yet, but it was no longer just survival either. Arlen nodded, standing to stretch his back. "There's tea, sort of." He crossed to the corner kitchenette, a repurposed shelf with a water coil, a mug and a canister of dried herbs from a moon station he couldn't remember the name of. He activated the coil and waited as the water warmed, stealing a glance over his shoulder. Mira hadn't moved, but her eyes flicked to the screen again. "You can use the console," he offered. "I won't stop you." She didn't answer, but she reached toward the interface with her fingers, brushing the controls like they might break. A low hum responded as the console flickered to life beneath her touch. Arlen poured the water and brought her a mug without a word. She didn't reach for it immediately, but the scent pulled her in, something warm, bitter, not pleasant but real. She took it from him after a moment's hesitation, her hands wrapping around the ceramic as if testing its weight. "I fixed the interval you marked last night," he said, settling across from her. "The phrasing works now better than my last 7 attempts. She blinked once, then nodded, still no praise, just acknowledgement. That was fine. He hadn't earned more. "You're not just reciting the rites," he added, "you're reconstructing them." This time she looked at him directly. "They were passed down mother to daughter by breath, even after the burning." She nodded. "How did you survive?" That made her go still too. Direct. Arlen didn't press. Instead he leaned back, sipping from his own mug, letting the silence settle again. He watched the steam rise, thin ribbons of heat catching the light from the window vent. "Finally," she said, "I didn't. Not in the way they wanted." It wasn't an answer, but it was a beginning. By midday she was reading aloud, not fully. Her voice came in fragments, hoarse syllables shaped by caution, but the words were there. Arlen sat back and let her recite, only offering corrections when she paused. She moved slowly through the text, sometimes stopping to edit a glyph with her finger, sometimes whispering a correction. He hadn't seen the language move through her like breath through an instrument, measured, sacred, alive. When she tired, he handed her another mug of broth. She drank it in small sips, eyes closed like she was memorizing the taste. "You're a historian," she said quietly. Arlen looked up. "I was. Now I survive. I trade scripts, transcribe forgotten dialects for smugglers who don't care what they mean. Sometimes I teach street kids how to write their names in 3 alphabets so they don't get labeled as illiterate waste." Mira stared at him a long moment. "And me?" he exhaled. "I don't know yet." Silence again, but this one stretched too long. She stood suddenly and walked to the mirror. Arlen didn't follow, he just watched. She stared at her reflection, the fog surface still etched faintly with her name mirror below it. She began drawing new glyphs, slower this time, intentional. When he finally approached, she stepped aside. The markings were different from the ones she'd written the night before. "These aren't Dari," he said. "No," she replied, "they're older. Protok. My mother called it first skin." He stared. "I thought that system was myth." "So did the ones who destroyed it." Her voice didn't shake. She said it with the precision of someone who'd long buried grief under discipline. "You're more than a memory keeper," he said softly. "I'm the last one who knows the first breath," she answered. Neither of them spoke for a while after that evening came in soft pulses of amber light filtering through the ceiling grids. Arlen boiled another ration and split it into 2 bowls. Mira accepted hers without comment. She didn't devour it. This time she ate slow, careful, chewing each bite like it was something she might need to explain later. As they sat across from each other, her posture slowly uncurled. "I heard your name once," she said. He looked up in the Outer stations, they said you vanished after refusing to build a neural syntax tool. Arlen's stomach tensed. I refused to design language for subjugation, he said quietly. They wanted something that could override thought through embedded grammar. If I'd completed it, they could have planted obedience in speech itself. And you walked away? No, he said. I was exiled, branded a liability, my name's worth less than a counterfeit passport. Now Mira looked down at her hands. Then why do you still carry it? He hesitated. Because it's mine. I earned it by surviving what they made me do. I keep it so I remember not to become that again. She didn't answer right away. Then softly she said, I kept mine in silence, buried in breath. That's still keeping it, he said. That's still resistance. They sat in silence again, but now it felt like something shared rather than imposed. That night she didn't return to the far wall. Instead she sat beside the console as he wrote in the journal, her knees tucked beneath her shoulder, resting lightly against the edge of the table. She didn't speak, but she didn't flinch when he stood, didn't freeze when he passed close. When he laid out the thermal blanket on the floor, she stepped over and settled down beside it, not touching but near, a kind of nearness that wasn't survival anymore, it was choice. Arlen turned off the lights and lay back. Mira shifted, drawing the blanket tighter around her shoulders before sleep claimed them both. She spoke once more. You said you failed someone. I did, he whispered. I didn't speak for her when it mattered. You did this time. He didn't know what to say to that. But he didn't have to, because she'd chosen to stay, and that more than language, more than breath, was the beginning of something neither of them could name yet, but it was alive and it was growing. It had started with a scent. Faint, feral, familiar. Mayer had frozen mid-sentence as it drifted from the hallway vent. Burned incense and copper, the kind used during the Ari funerals. Her lips parted but no sound came out. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble, but her silence shifted deeper, heavier. Arlan noticed immediately. He didn't speak, just closed the console and waited. After several breaths she said, they used to burn that after executions. Arlan nodded slowly. They're trying to intimidate you. No, she murmured. They're trying to remind me who they think I am. She turned to him then, not with fear but with resolve. You said once you failed someone. He hesitated, then motioned toward the floor between them. Sit, I'll tell you. She sat cross-legged, no defenses, no distance. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, voice steady but low. My sister's name was LRA, 2 years older. We grew up in an orbital colony outside the core, one of those sterile education habitats where everyone's a prodigy by 12 or forgotten by 13. LRA was unforgettable. He paused, exhaling. She built languages. Like other kids, built puzzles, complex structures, fluid systems. She didn't learn speech, she dissected it, lived in it. She believed language could prevent war. Mira tilted her head. That belief got her killed. No, Arlen said. My silence. Did she? Waited. I joined the Xeno Linguistic Institute when I turned 17. She was already a star there. I was the shadow. Then the military arrived. They wanted a new kind of communication tech, language as a weapon. They called it subjugation. Syntax, commands buried in grammar, programming obedience through sentence structure. Mira's breath hitched. Spoken mind control. Yes, they use something like that on the border moons. Some of my people began reciting trade can, then forgot the old breath lines entirely, as if something had been erased. They were, Arlen said, jaw tight, and my sister helped build the prototype, or they made her help. He looked down at his hands clenched. When I saw the alpha strings I recognized her voice patterns embedded in the cadence, her syllable weight, her signature breath breaks. Did she survive? They said she left, but I don't believe them, not when I heard her voice inside a weapon. The silence that followed was unlike the others they'd shared. This one wasn't hollow, it was full of guilt, memory, and something raw neither of them knew how to name. Mira finally spoke. My mother taught me the rites in secret, not just the common ones. The origin codex, first breath theory. She said it was older than stars, that it lived in the body, not the mind. That memory through breath could never be rewritten. Arlen nodded slowly. That's why they hunted your people, not for religion, not even for resistance, but because you carried a language they couldn't replicate, something that couldn't be broken down or bought. Mira's eyes flicked to the console. They tried the collector who bought me. He had machines, neural extractors, voice Recorders every night he'd play back what he'd pulled from others begging prayers parts of the rights trying to trick me into correcting them. Her voice trembled just once. I didn't speak, not even once, and he gave up. He said I was bad stock, not worth the energy I was left to rot. That's when you found me. Arlen's throat tightened. I almost walked past you but you didn't. He looked at her then, not as an artifact, not as a survivor, but as the one who endured when everyone else was erased. I thought helping you might make up for failing LRA, he admitted, but now I see that was selfish. No, she said it was honest. A small still moment passed between them, neither confession nor absolution, just recognition. Then a soft chime pinged from the console. Arlen checked the display. His face changed. What is it? Mira asked. A perimeter scan. Someone's on the stairs. She was already standing. Arlen moved quickly to the hidden hatch behind the supply rack. We're going out the back. Mira's voice was level. Is it them? Corporate? I'd bet everything, and if it is, they're not here to talk. He grabbed a journal, the breath crystal, and a ration pack. Mira retrieved her satchel. No panic, no questions, only readiness. They slipped through the vent corridor into the maintenance duct network. Pipes hissed with recycled vapor. Walls flickered with faulty power relays. Arlen guided them silently, counting steps by instinct. They'd done this before too many times, but halfway up the northern shaft Maya stopped. She turned, breath sharp. Wait. Arlen stopped too. What? She reached into her cloak and pulled out a narrow strip of fabric, a band deep blue with a spiral of gold thread etched into its surface. My mother gave this to me, she said. The spiral represents the first breath, the beginning of all memory. Arlen frowned. Why now? Because if we get separated you'll carry it. He stared at her. I won't leave you. I know, she said gently, but memory has to survive even if we don't. He took the band from her hands. It was still warm. He tied it around his wrist tight. Firm, deliberate. I'll protect it, he said. I'll protect you. She nodded. Then they moved again. Outside the station pulsed with static warnings. Drones buzzed the far alleys somewhere behind them. Doors slammed open. Voices barked commands, but ahead the upper ring waited. Along with the last person Arlen knew he could trust, they ran without looking back. Two shadows moving toward the edge of something vast, not just escape but beginning. The warning hadn't been subtle. But in Veritha's maw, subtlety was never the point. It was about making you sweat. About letting you know how little time you had left to vanish. Arlen moved with precision, the kind that came from too many years of running. He packed only what mattered: the journal, the archived scrolls, a pulse burner, and 2 rations. Everything else could burn. Mira worked silently beside him. No panic, no flinching, just focused motion. Her hands methodically gathering the ceremonial codes and binding them in a narrow scroll wrap. Her calm unsettled him more than any noise would have. They'll come in from below, Arlen said. That stairwell is a bottleneck. We'll have to take the maintenance ducts up through the ventilation shafts to reach the outer ring. Mira looked up from her satchel. You've done this before too many times. She didn't ask for more. She zipped the satchel and nodded. They left through the side panel behind the storage shelf. Arlen keyed in the override on the hatch and it hissed open to reveal a crawl space barely wide enough for their shoulders. Pipes lined the walls, slick with condensation. Every few meters lights blinked red, a signal from the EMS deep systems that someone had flagged this route. Their time was shorter than he'd hoped. Keep low, he said. Don't speak unless I tell you. Mira followed without a word. They moved through the vent shafts like shadows, their feet barely scraping the grated floor. Arlen's mind traced the maps he'd memorized, counting junctions, timing patrols. The traitor from earlier, whoever he really worked for, wasn't just some curious collector. That voice, that threat. The pins on his coat. Arlen knew the type: acquisition officers, blacklisted units for black budget buyers. He hadn't seen those pins in years, not since LRA. The ducts opened into a wide filtration bay on level 3, a forgotten level, mostly storage and failed prototypes. The air here was hot, dry, filled with the smell of scorched dust. Arlen pulled the grate aside and motioned for Mara to stay close. She did, ducking beside him as they crept through the empty rows of storage vats and broken water purifiers. Then a sound froze them both, footsteps, not the random heavy ones of looters or vagrants. These were measured, synchronized, gear-driven. 3, maybe 4. Arlen's hand found Mira's wrist.